It's as though the glass of my vision is about to shatter. I expect to wake from a dream into an ever worse reality, not as if I'm going through a transient tribulation, but a calm before a storm. Within the next 2 weeks, COVID took off in the United States. Schools were beginning to shut down and students were told to return home. I told my boss I need to effectively resign, which was understandable as another coworker in college said the same. The bar held an annual St. Patrick's Day party, which now was also my last day. COVID was far along enough that the city had canceled its parade. I figured the bar would also cancel, but they never did. It was an opportunity. The day with the highest tips, the most people, even more so now with so many other places deciding to shut down. The day of, we were packed. All the tables were cleared away, standing room only, and I still had to snake my way through the crowds. The consensus was this was a last hurrah. One good day, then everything could shut down for a couple weeks before returning to normal. My mindset was in doom mode and my expectations more disastrous than reality. I had been paying attention to the news in China for the past few months. Stories of plague levels of death, national instability, and hard lockdowns. But here I was, watching people get drunk. From there, everything paused. By the time my parents picked me up from campus, I was one of the last remaining. The halls were barren. I saw one other person besides the desk receptionist on my way out. Nothing seemed serious anymore. My interest in online school quickly faded to near nothing. Pass-fail made it so there are no consequences for not trying. The remaining 2 months of school flew by, and somehow I had to find a way to occupy myself. There's no work available, even though I applied to anything and everything. And if I did want to go out, either places had shut down or reduced hours. Going anywhere after 10 p.m. wasn't an option anymore. I did take a class over the summer, but summer classes are never real, especially it being a humanities requirement. Watching the lectures at 1.5 times speed and never doing the required readings was enough to succeed. I started to play the piano and write. Being in percussion in middle school gave me some familiarity with the keyboard. The ability to read sheet music was the biggest benefit. I had to learn proper fingering because my experience up to that point was with mallets, and I wasn't about to learn piano playing with my 2 index fingers. My dad had a binder of printouts from an online class he took about a decade before for piano, and besides that, I learned songs that I found online. There were multiple times I would play the same portion of Canon in D for hours straight until it was perfect, and I only wanted to at night. That was the only time I was awake, but I would sit in my room playing the same thing over and over until I finally was forced to get up to pee. I'm not sure if my way of learning is how you're supposed to. Both drums and piano require hand independence, but I learn as if I'm doing one sequence of movements instead of learning the independent parts. It's only after learning the parts together that I can mentally separate them. And the writing. I had wanted to write, but up until that point there were only ideas with no interest in actually carrying them out. Besides an assortment of topics I had been thinking about for years, there are now stories from my time in Chicago I wanted to archive. Just so I wouldn't forget details, outlines were made for the stories, but I was more interested in the random topics. Writing the stories was work, whereas my present thoughts could come out as fast as I could type. I thought quarantine would make a good setting for self-reflection. I laugh when I look in the mirror. It's absurdist comedy that people who care about me and even more so love. I appreciate that the emotional capacity exists for the sake of other people's well-being, but applied to me, it is lost due to my own failings. I minimize myself so that no one can ever get invested to the point of disappointment when they realize I won't be fixed. I don't want to buy into the delusion of eventual normalcy anymore. I'd rather never try than have false hope. I'd stop talking to my friends to try and incite some sort of change in me, to see if a greater appreciation would grow for them, if my mood would change, if my thoughts would become more scattered, trying to determine if I could worsen my mental state through isolation. To a small extent, I learned how I ticked. The later I stayed up, the more manic I would get. Being miserable was a fundamental part of my identity, and anything else would be fake. And yet at the same time, I felt like I had no feelings. There was a general dullness. The act of observing how I felt would cast doubt on the genuineness of those emotions. For instance, conceptualizing that I felt sad would cause that feeling to disappear, and from that, I would doubt I even felt anything at all. There was something similar that happened often. I would realize I felt awful, and the fact that I liked feeling awful, and because I was enjoying something, it would vanish in a sudden zap of emptiness. This would leave a hole in my head, truly feeling nothing, a void of emotion that was, out of everything, the worst feeling. My own happiness means nothing in the literal sense. All my emotions are fleeting. Why make someone who has real emotions suffer for my half-feelings? Nothing I say lacks a hint of untruth. It's as if I have no need to say anything, but when I do, I always feel like I'm exaggerating. I feel things, I just don't feel like I feel things. This is only around people. Alone, I can justify my emotions to myself, but if someone is there to witness, I feel like I'm acting. Happiness and sadness are things I can feel, it's as if they've been truncated. There's 40% that's been cut off the top of every emotion, and that's if I even care to have a reaction at all. And there was worsening dissociation. Experientially, what this is like is I feel whatever myself is recess into my eyes. I can't find any new thoughts, but my mind still races. Tunnel vision, heavy visual snow, color patterns all over. I stop moving altogether and start to take long pauses mid-sentence while words fail to pair up into a complete sequence. All these things normally occur in the background of every day, but become more apparent with more pressure. I wish I could just be one or the other. Allow me to let go without being caught in the middle. Just go off the deep end so at the bare minimum I can be certain that I am insane instead of being left wondering what I am and am not. My only consistency is that I hate myself. I keep hurting and I can't do anything about it. It doesn't make sense and I can't do anything about it. No matter how much I want to forget about the past, I just can't. Even the things I supposed I'd moved past years ago. I'm losing it because I wake up one day feeling like I can make everything work and the next I'm back trying to sleep thoughts away. Conflicts between hope and defeat are common. And at a certain point I get so frustrated that I hit a mental roadblock where new thoughts cease and I get stuck on half sentences. And in an attempt to resolve my problem, I regress and repeat the same thing over and over without being able to move on to a different thought. In my isolation sabbaticals, I started noting my words per day again. Over a week, I averaged 20. Going to sleep just before my parents got home, the only time I would talk would be the next morning as they left for work. Accelerating my own decline was enjoyable. The feeling of not being completely there while also not caring about anything in particular, coupled with the random bursts of energy, was delightful. I spent a lot of time in the kitchen, pacing, dancing, talking to myself, laughing at intrusive thoughts. My sense of time had long been destroyed. The days would turn to weeks, and the weeks to months, and months to years, but all was still crushingly uncertain as time rushed by. Relationships were troubling me, romantic and platonic. Most of my days were spent reliving the same situations, having the same thoughts, feeling the same sense of inadequacy. I don't think I've ever felt love, either from myself or from others. I know what it's supposed to feel like, but whenever someone says that they love me, I don't feel anything. The only reason I reciprocate is because it makes them feel better. Truthfully, I don't. It pains me to lie through my teeth, but I don't see the point of telling someone you seem to not love. I don't think I should be in romantic relationships again due to this. I would like for me to be able to be in a relationship. Practically, I don't think it would work. There are too many things that come as a package in a relationship. When you start a relationship, whether you realize it or not, you're either going to break up with this person or be with them for the rest of your life. Staying with one person forever is what scares me. Eventually, you both grow complacent and too comfortable with each other to the point of being predictable. It can't last a lifetime. Around this time, Sam and I started to regularly cross the border into Wisconsin so we could eat indoors at an IHOP. I met Sam in high school, but we ended up going to the same college, which allowed us to keep contact. We used to go to the local IHOP to study for calculus, but with Illinois not opening up indoor dining for the foreseeable future, we restarted the tradition in another state. But instead of studying, we were scheming, trying to find something to do with our very free time. A couple business ideas were discussed in length, with both of us knowing it would never happen. One was a pharmaceutical company where I would test new drugs on myself. He told me about an idea to visit the nearest In-N-Out, which was in Denton, Texas. I latched on almost immediately. Before he finished his proposal, my own motivations stormed in my head and produced an idea. When we get to Texas, I can take a picture next to the Welcome to Texas sign and post it on Snapchat. I wouldn't tell any of my friends that I'd be going on a trip. They would all find out when I'm 1,000 miles away. The other part of the joke being, I never post on Snapchat. But a joke isn't really why I wanted to go. I knew I could get her attention with that post. I wanted to bait out a conversation, and the fact I never posted would be used to draw that attention. We set a tentative date for early August. For the next 2 months, we would meet at IHOP and discuss the logistics. Sam has a process of eating pancakes where he digs a pit in the center of his stack and then fills it with syrup, creating a pool. Eventually, he mashes his whole plate up into a mush of dough and syrup. It never failed to interest me. Many times while I was explaining possible destinations, I would stop to watch and laugh. Generally, the plan was to wing it. There would be a list of destinations we could pick from, but since we didn't know the exact time we would be anywhere, nothing was set in stone. The main destination was In-N-Out. Everything in between didn't matter as much. If everything worked out, there is a possible second destination. My aunt had been living in Austin for the past 10 years, and with her approval, driving an extra 3 hours on top of our expected 14 to get to Dallas was insignificant. She was very willing to let us stay. Our trip was extended to a week to allow for a few days in Austin. Now it wasn't a 1,000-mile there and back drive to In-N-Out. I picked Sam up early in the morning. With permission, I used my family's SUV, the car designated as Mom's car. This allowed for much-needed extra space. Besides, our only other options were my 2006 Taurus or his Mustang that permanently smelled like his gym shorts, regardless of the fact that he removed the pile of clothes in his trunk a year prior. We didn't do anything until we got to St. Louis. Being from Illinois, there isn't much we'd want to see in Illinois. We did shortly stop in Springfield to pee in a church parking lot before moving on, but that was the most eventful thing that happened. A main component of the trip was to visit abandoned buildings. There are plenty of urban exploration websites that give guides and locations for different abandoned buildings. The specific one in East St. Louis was pretty well known. It's an abandoned theater. As we approached the city, I was reminded of how weird the arch is. It's surreal when it suddenly appears on the horizon. It looks out of place, and yet it's the only visual indicator you have of the city. We pulled off the highway and parked close to the theater. It was not a great neighborhood to wander around in, and we were quite aware of it. The sun hadn't set yet, and I was uncomfortable with trying to enter the building in daylight. I told Sam we could scout out the entrance now and come back at sunset. There's a small shack-like enclosure on the side of the building with a hole where a door should have been or probably used to be. Some bushes were surrounding it, but the whole area otherwise was completely open. Not many people were about, it being the first summer of coronavirus, but I still wasn't comfortable with trying to enter. There were backup plans. In all our time at IHOP, we had made a roster of destinations along our route to In-N-Out. There was never any intention to visit them all. Circumstance decided what we did depending on where we were, where we needed to be at the end of the day, and what time it currently was. For St. Louis, we had the options of the City Museum, which is an amalgam of seemingly random objects stitched together that also doubles as a playground, the Laumeier Sculpture Park, which is a fairly large landscape with sculptures dotted around the park, and, of course, the Arch. The Sculpture Park was our pick. Our mistake was being outdoors. It was middle of August hot, and there was almost no tree coverage. I ran out of water fast. Eventually we got hungry and left after doing a round about the park. There were some good pieces there, like the huge realistic eyeball, but I was too hot to really enjoy the experience. Somehow we ended up at a hospital that had 2 food stalls in the back of their parking lot, and we bought some overpriced personal pizzas. With there being time to spare, we decided to go to the Arch. We didn't go up, just because we didn't want to pay. Instead, we walked around the lawn, watching the Mississippi and the takeoff of helicopter tours. With the sun setting, it was time to cross the river and return to the theater. We parked close by and fearfully approached the side of the building. I was the first to go in. Inside the shack, there is a final door leading into the building. As we approached, I heard the squeaking of bats, which I had already known about from looking at this place online. But in my research, I somehow didn't catch that the stage had collapsed. I turned on my phone flashlight and a huge pit greeted me. I turned right around. I am not going in there. The whole stage has collapsed. Looking back later, I clearly saw the pit in the online pictures as well. Most likely we would have been fine to go in. We still wanted to spend a little more time in the city before we left. I had been to St. Louis once before. I went on a college visit to Washington University, which I did not get into, but there was a large park close by that I remembered I was impressed with. We showed up there with no plans, except the plan to wander around. Everything had an Art Deco look. Large fountains, a promenade of expansive lawn leading up to an art museum. It was all well cared for. People picnicking, sitting around doing as much nothing as we were. And the warm park lights as the sky darkened added to the stillness. When we started driving again, the goal was to stop in Springfield for the night. But when I started to nod off at the wheel, I cut it off short. The next rest stop would be where we slept. The following day wouldn't be very eventful, mostly spent driving further south. There was one place in Tulsa we were going to stop at. It's called the Center of the Universe. The small circle marks the spot where, when you speak, the echo comes back louder than you initially spoke. We didn't stay long because it was 100 degrees outside, and with most places being closed, there was no escape. Also, there is only so much entertainment you can get out of making noises in an empty city. We did attempt to find the Tulsa tunnels, but we couldn't find any building with an entrance that was actually open. The series of tunnels were constructed as the downtown skyscrapers were being built as a way to connect buildings without having to go outside. We were at the point where empty underground pedways seemed amusing. Oklahoma City was next. Again, there weren't any plans. We saw an exit pointing to the National Cowboy and Western History Museum and decided on that. It was now 4 o'clock, the museum closing at 5, but we went inside anyway. Because it was so late, the lady running the ticket counter allowed us in for free, saying to leave any donation on our way out if possible. We gratefully went in. There was a large section dedicated to rodeo history, and another part of the museum had a replica Old Western Main Street with detailed interiors for the schoolhouse and general stores. We skimmed as much as we could, given that there wasn't enough time to see everything. Eventually, the guards started to clear the exhibits to make sure everyone had left, corralling us to the entrance. The thing is, our suggested route didn't have us going through Tulsa or Oklahoma City, instead going for a straight shot towards Dallas. The detour we took didn't add much time, and I figured larger cities would have things to do, no matter how mundane, at least compared to the countryside. Yet, just there, in the countryside, was what made the day worthwhile for me, with Sam asleep and me driving through the Chickasaw Reservation. The sun was setting, casting warm colors on an expanse of wind turbines all along the horizon of rolling hills. And down south, the sky seems to open up. This beauty reached its completion with the massive casino just before crossing into Texas. Here we were, at my motive. I pulled off onto the shoulder road, looking for the sign I had scouted out on Street View months before. There was a mental picture in my head, leaning against the signposts with my face obstructed by my hair in the shadow of the late evening sun. Sam wanted a picture too. After I got my phone back, I instantly posted. Continuing in the series of abandoned buildings, there was an unfinished mansion off the interstate in Denton, Texas. The sun hadn't completely set, and this being a very visible location, we weren't comfortable with going in. Besides being within view of the highway, there is a park nearby, along with some warehouses that had moderate activity. For now, all we could do was investigate. We parked the car in a nearby lot serving the park and started towards the mansion. There was construction, and the entire perimeter was fenced off, something I had not previously known. As we wandered around the surrounding streets, someone from one of the warehouses came to warn us. Apparently, there were cameras all around the site. He had easily clocked us. 2 teenagers walking around empty streets. Our intentions were obvious. We got back to driving. Out of everything, we skipped Dallas, the exception being a restroom stop at a Walgreens in downtown. Getting as far as possible tonight was our goal. Just before Waco was our stopping point. And after all this time spent driving, when we tried it the next morning, In-N-Out wasn't that amazing. I didn't understand the affection for it. The sunflower oil is not a good choice for fries. When I was younger, I didn't like my aunt because she would love-bomb me in a teasing way. As I grew older, I began to appreciate her company more, and I became comfortable with her calling me Sweetness. My aunt has a lot of energy, very much a people person. Easy to talk to, which lands her many connections, and with this we were able to get the whole Austin experience. Tex-Mex, barbecue, food trucks, going to bars with live music in the middle of peak COVID. Sam was enjoying himself. An older rancher lady who hung out with us took an affinity to him. She would buy him drinks, continuously encouraging him to drink more even though he wasn't yet drinking age. And he's diabetic. Everyone we talked to was friendly and insisted on the both of us moving to Austin. We liked it there, so we extended our visit because both of us didn't need to be back home at any specific time. My aunt lived out on the city limits near Lake Travis and knew a couple people with lake access. I had not gone swimming since middle school because that would require being shirtless, but I was willing to now because no one else would be around. Sam and I made no prior plans to go swimming, so we had to pick up bathing suits from Target. To someone who has never been to California, Austin looks like California. The houses, the hills, the terrain, the heat, all these multi-million-dollar lake houses that had that southwestern style that reminded me of Los Angeles homes. Being in the water was a needed break from August, Texas. While we were in the water, my aunt asked me if I was still in a relationship. No, but we broke up for reasons of my own making. Sam was floating a distance away. I'm not sure if relationships are for me. I asked about hers, why she never got married after being together with the same person for over a decade. She explained that, ironically, between her and my mom, she was the one who always wanted to get married and have kids, whereas my mother did not. But it was a past relationship where her partner was abusive that broke her desire to have kids. As we got out of the lake, my aunt cued me in on how my mom had been feeling. My mom had told her, "You probably talk to him more than I do." We eventually left to continue on our trip. That day was spent on a straight shot through Arkansas towards Memphis. We left Austin fairly late, so by the time we reached Little Rock, it was already dark and we were more than tired. I haven't explained our sleeping situation. To avoid paying for lodging, we slept in the car every night, except when staying with my aunt. There were a couple places I knew of that were fine with overnight parking. Rest stops, Walmart, and Cracker Barrel. Sam would recline the front seat, and I would sleep in back. August in the South is hot, and even hotter in an enclosed space with two people continuously sweating. It wasn't an option to run the car all night to have air conditioning, so before leaving on the trip, we bought rechargeable fans. The fan would always run out of battery a little before waking up. Enough to keep cool through the night, but that last morning hour without it caused me to wake up covered in sweat. We would then drive to a Planet Fitness to shower. If you have the higher priced membership, you can go to any location and bring a friend. This was much better than paying for each shower at a truck stop. When I was still planning the trip, my mom, after telling her I was considering truck stops for showers, told me that I was going to get propositioned being a handsome young man. We found the nearest Walmart, got out of the car, and opened the trunk to set up our sleeping arrangements. As I climb in the back, shut the trunk door behind me, and sit down, we both realize our mistake. A summer night, in the South, surrounded by parking lot light poles. In the few minutes the doors were open, a swarm of mosquitoes had invited themselves inside. There were mosquitoes on the walls, the floor, the ceiling, the steering wheel, and increasingly on us. I grabbed a handful of tissues for myself and handed the box to Sam. Every time we would squish a mosquito, it left a stain on the car fabric, creating about 100 brown smudges all around the car. We were laughing so hard because every time we thought we killed them all and paused for a minute, 5 more would appear. It took us an hour of constant killing before we were confident enough to go to bed. There weren't any plans for Memphis, but we were here and didn't want to skip a larger city. Sam wanted to go to the Elvis Graceland estate, but soon changed his mind when he saw it was $50 admission. It took a long time of driving and wandering around Memphis before we found an activity. Thankfully, the Bass Pro Pyramid had just opened for the day. It is a strange building, even aside from the fact that it's a Bass Pro Pyramid. A swamp-themed moat meanders around the inside. And because the pyramid used to be a stadium, the interior is completely open. A central pillar shoots up the center as the elevator to the observation deck. Except for the stores around the perimeter, ground to rafters is 300 feet of empty space. Unfortunately, the elevator has an entry fee, so Sam and I decided to get our observation deck experience on one of the highway bridges crossing the Mississippi as we left the city. The last big thing I had wanted to do was go to a dark sky site. Before the trip, I had scouted out some spots. Almost the entire eastern United States has a significant amount of light pollution, but there are areas in southern Illinois that are comparatively dark, although not nearly as much as you would get in the west. Our destination of Moonshine, Illinois was remote enough to where the roads were named like a coordinate system. The intersection of 600th Street and 300th Road was the location of the store serving moonshine. We stood around the idling car and took in the silence of our surroundings. Except for the light of the store's porch, it was complete darkness. But it was overcast and we weren't able to see anything. As we attempted to find a spot with open skies, we wandered onto the side roads of side roads and drove through dirt and gravel that forced us to give up and turn back towards the paved roads. We never got to see the sky. It wasn't worth the risk of breaking down in Moonshine, Illinois. At this point, I took over driving. I decided I was going to drive through the night to make it home by morning. After going through Sam's playlist of the same songs over and over again throughout this trip, I was thoroughly sick. I wasn't willing to put anything on, so he had me listen to a Christian music playlist he made years ago. For almost all the songs, I remember the lyrics in full from hearing them in church so many times. He was asleep for the majority of the remaining ride. After all the time we'd spent together, we had a quick goodbye once we reached his house. We unloaded his things and cleared the trunk of all the junk we had accumulated. Then, after 13 hours of driving, I went on my way home. Trevor and I both did not enjoy online school. There's the option to return to campus, so we both decided on going in order to catch some of the magic we felt that first semester. But it was still too early on for most people to be willing to return, something we learned on arrival. I would go to as many classes as I could in person, but almost always I was the sole attendant. Physically being in a classroom helped me to get homework done and stay engaged, but the whole campus experience was lacking. The food was even worse than before. Takeout only, reduced options, and vastly reduced effort from the staff. And we were required to pay for this, the most expensive meal plan, in order to live on campus. I attempted to fight with administration over this requirement. In the past, there was more choice in the meal plan you would buy, but they did this sneaky thing where year by year it became more stringent. They gradually funneled all years into the most expensive unlimited plan. I had all the documents spanning back years to prove my point, and I set up a phone call appointment with the vice dean. She was not listening to me at all. At first, I was told nothing has changed before she compared the mandatory plan to getting a meal plan at Disney World when you stay at their resorts. I knew this conversation was going nowhere. I said it makes no sense to limit choice, that a rule being a rule does not justify it being a rule. I put up with it. But Trevor went to the Commons so infrequently that we calculated his average meal cost at $50, most instances for 2 slices of pizza. The thoughts I had been entertaining all semester gradually were written down. When I was bored or nodding off in class, I would write down whatever I was thinking at the time, and eventually this extended itself into writing on the computer in my dorm again. And the thing is, you forget the details of how things used to be. You're left with an idyllic view of what was without acknowledging all the bad parts because you don't remember anymore. So even though you know how you feel immediately after a breakup is the truth, there isn't a capacity to feel that same way now. It's not a matter of any love, it's a matter of found love. Most people have familial love just by being born, but anything outside of that is earned, for lack of a better word. But even when someone has loved me outside of family, I still don't feel anything. In abstract, I want to be loved, but I'm put off by the fact that a real person is behind those feelings. People are able to love me. I can't understand that, and it feels gross to imply anything different. From experience, I can love. What holds me back is that I'm under the assumption I'm unlovable. So when someone does in fact love me, it feels disingenuous, leading to my own commitment issues. The concept of loving yourself is very off-putting. At minimum, I'm the person who's going to have to live with me for the longest, and I, more than anyone else, knows all the bad there is to say about me. I know how bankrupt I am. That's not something I can lie to myself about. I made lists of reasons as to why I wouldn't work in relationships. I tried to figure out what love means definitionally. What is wrong with me and my reactions to relationships? Why do I need relationships? Why do I fear relationships? Why do I hate relationships? The reality is, I get nowhere trying to analyze definitions, motives, and reasons for love and emotion. My problem is that I'm not comfortable when I have no knowledge of why I do or do not love. I'm afraid of repeating what I did to Madison, but in that pursuit I unwittingly do just that over and over again. I broke up with Madison because I was a shit and scared shitless boyfriend who couldn't do the things a partner should. I dragged my feet in progressing relationships and refrained from telling people I'm even in them because, to me, in my delusion, it's a showcase of, look at how pathetic this person is. They like me. Universally, at some point in the relationship, I find myself on the floor trying to sleep away regretful thoughts of, why does this person have to like me? I may bide some time until I finally decide to ruin everything, but eventually I shoot myself and the other person in the foot in an attempt to save both suffering. It's not true, though. I maintain my righteous self-perception, and the girl is left with unrequited love that was a lie all the way through. I would say, I love you out of convenience for myself, never once meaning it. I want to apologize, but it really only serves me. Why dig up the past when my regret offers no respite, no reconciliation? It only removes it from my mind. Even so, there's nothing left to say with fake tears. I had a habit of checking Snapchat to see if she posted, because I knew it would set me off. This being my only daily use of the app wrought me shame, even though no one knew and it was impossible for anyone to know. Beginning to isolate again during winter break, in combination with my continued voice call sabbaticals, I also wouldn't check my phone for weeks on end. I was tired of expecting something and at the same time scared of the possibility, so I would avoid looking at messages. I set my time at 2 weeks. Late at night, I rose from my desk to get my phone. Now in the kitchen, I was pacing back and forth, getting the courage to press the power button. The chances of having something waiting after 2 weeks must have been large. And there it was. I saw the name, immediately turned the phone off again, and stared at the wall, my mind blanking. I'm high again. She asked if I wanted to talk, and we planned to meet at a local Panera. The Phenibut couldn't stop my shaking and nausea, but it is required nonetheless. With it being the first year of COVID, no place was going to be open indoors, which we had not thought of. When I arrive, I find the doors locked. The barista's staring at me. She pulls up, I explain, and then she gets in my car. Plan is now to get drive-through Dunkin' and then drive around as long as the conversation lasts. Just catching up. The conceptualization in my head of how I mesh with other people is like a dice roll. Seemingly without reason, I could functionally interact with some people and not with others, with me knowing immediately after meeting which of the two it was going to be. And it was easy for me to talk to her. Because I had no caffeine tolerance, any amount would stim me out, and combined with the Phenibut, I was talking nonstop. We mostly shared what we had been doing over the past year. Effects of COVID, how we were staying occupied, effects on school, and drugs. I shared how I had my wisdom teeth removed in the past week and was skipping my doses of hydrocodone to accumulate a stash without my mom knowing. I knew for a fact she was counting my pills, so I had to hide them at 6-hour intervals. Then I could take 3 or 4 at a time while my family was asleep. I wound up having the best nod of my life while curled up in a grandma chair under a blanket, listening to a hair-brushing ASMR video. She had already gotten her wisdom teeth out and shared how she got a dry socket from trying to smoke too soon after the procedure. And we had the shared experience of rummaging through the medicine cabinet attempting to find something to get high off. I was still driving and we were a whiles away from where we had met. She said she had to go pick up weed. I started on the way back and was asked about my future plans.
I have no idea. I'm not thinking that far ahead. Probably will stay near Chicago after I graduate.
Turning the question around, I asked her. She said she was considering joining the Peace Corps after graduation, going somewhere in the Southeast Asia region.
I thought you had moved to Texas.
It worked. We returned to the Panera parking lot. She had her errand to run. It took less than a minute of me driving away to crash. I was talking too much. She knew I was high. I should have asked her more questions. This isn't going to work. When I got home, I went to my room and curled up in front of my bed. I texted,
"Sorry about that. I hope I wasn't talking too much." "No, I don't think you were. It's fine."
The next day, I drove out to Rockford so I could think. After every interaction, I would continually replay events and continue conversations and dream of different outcomes to the point of making myself nauseous. Car rides allow for my mind to wander without feeling like those thoughts are obsessive and overbearing. I'm specifically carving out time for them, as opposed to drugging myself asleep to avoid them. The hopelessness I felt had no reason. I knew I didn't do anything wrong, but it was still there. I sat near the airport and watched Amazon-branded planes take off what seemed like every minute. The radio, on the ride over, told me there was a large winter storm coming in the next few hours, so I knew I had little time left before I had to leave. And when I did start home, I began to record.
I wasn't doing too well today. I felt like I felt pretty hopeless, even though nothing bad happened yesterday when I met up with you. It was just I just have troubles. You know, this is what it is. This is what it is. I like her, but every time I talk to her or anything around the fact, it makes me miserable. Just like it is terrible. Like I could do everything right, and it makes me feel gross. Like this, more than anything else, makes me hopeless. And I know I shouldn't be, but I am. And I really can't do anything to help that, because it's just like, what am I supposed to do about that? I can't really change the way that I feel. I mean, I feel fine now, but that doesn't mean I will tomorrow or whenever else. It's just like the days preceding, I was happy. I was excited to go see her, but I'm still nervous because that's just what's gonna happen. And then not even the day after, when I get home, I start feeling terrible. And now that could just be because I was coming down from Phenibut, but I don't think that's it, because this happens every time. It's like whenever I interact with her to any degree, it makes me feel terrible. And I keep doing it too. That's a funny thing.
There was still guilt over how I had treated her in high school. Besides the fact that I liked her, I felt an obligation to stay available. I was confused about our relation to one another and why someone in her situation would want to stay in contact with me.
I know nothing's wrong, but I just feel terrible. And that could be just because it's frustrating because of the distance, to where it's just not something that's going to happen now or even for the foreseeable future at all, because it's just, I'm still going to be in school for 2 years, and she's 2 years plus whatever, and then she was talking about the Peace Corps, so it's kind of just unlikely. It's unlikely for anything to happen.
I had self-destructed in front of her, and she was still reaching out a year later. High school was a clean break of contact for many people, and she had no obligation to. There are no other indicators for me to pick up on. The uncertainty kept me ruminating on the same situations, trying to discern how she felt and what her motives were.
It wasn't even, I wouldn't even call it a date that we were on. I was just wanted to catch up. And that's all that did happen. And I wasn't expecting anything else, but still it kind of puts that despair back into me, where I know what I know and what I feel are not reconciled, and I mean, I don't even know if she likes me, or like what is going on at all with any of this. It's just,
And I knew this new encounter between us would cause the obsessive thinking to become nearly unbearable over the next coming weeks. There'd be no mental breaks or silence. She would be a constant, only reset at the end of the day with sleep. But I was unwilling to give it up as obsession became an everyday occurrence. The routine was accompanied by a kind of comfort.
There's no point. There's no point because of the distance. And I'm just going to be consigned to the fact that this is something that I'm going to have to live with. Because even before, I would think about it basically every day, and there's nothing that I could do about that. Like when I was in the city, I would think about it less, but now that I'm back here, it's just more. And because I kind of egged myself on with this, it gets even more and more and more and more. And it's not, I don't want to feel terrible, but I also don't want to not talk to her. Like, even if we only meet up like every year or so, I guess I enjoy that more than just trying to let it go. Because even though I know that there is such a big chance that it will not happen and nothing will come of this, I'm holding on to the fact that there is that small sliver that something would happen.
And I loved feeling awful. She became intertwined with it. I was aware this feeling was the exact one that had destroyed every previous relationship.
I just get hung up on this one thing because I get hung up on this one because I hate myself. Because even if, and this happened before, like during senior year, even when I knew that she liked me, that itself made me feel terrible because I do not like myself. And other people liking me does not amount to enough to make me not hate myself.
Every bad feeling was amplified. With or without talking to her, I felt terrible, but interacting with her always brought out my worst feelings soon after.
That's probably what sucks the most, is that I feel like I'm just watching. Like, it's just so much out of my control that I don't feel like I am an actor most of the time. I am just watching a life go by. Because it's just, everything's just slipping by. And that's what makes me feel terrible. When I don't feel like, when it feels like something's off, fundamentally off. Like, I'm not here. Not even fake, like something's fake. It's just almost as if I'm playing a part. Like I'm acting as someone who people would presume cares about the world and their own life, when in reality I'm kind of just disconnected and I just don't feel it. Like I don't understand. I go on this wild ride and I just the emotional roller coaster, and then still somewhere buried beneath there I feel like I'm not the one speaking right now. Like, I mean, I guess the best way to describe it is watching a movie. It's like I'm speaking someone else's words. Like, it's not me. When I move my fingers, it's not me. When I speak, it's not me. It's not anything of me. It's like my actual vision is like a couple inches behind, or just like an inch behind my skull, where my eyes should be. And I like how I'm going back into the same garbage dump place that I was in before I left, because I'm remembering all the things that are wrong. And I still want to die. That's still a truth. I still think about just swerving into the oncoming traffic, becoming the terminal green line passenger. I'm just tired. I'm tired of tired of going through the same things over and over and over. And it feels like there's no way out. Nothing at all. Because I don't want to take the compromises that I would have to make with medication. So I don't. So I just go through all of this. And it's just, it's not even in like the moment to moment it's terrible. It's just in aggregate, it's exhausting.
We didn't talk to each other much after that day. One exchange of a Happy New Year's and then return to status quo. It was back to another semester of online school as Trevor and I decided to stay home. There was no point in being on campus unless everyone else returned. My school performance was still going down, and I didn't have the cop-out of pass-fail anymore. Other than the wisdom teeth hydros, I was in an extended period of low drug use. But around that time, I again started looking at darknet markets and research chemical sites. It's not something I ever fully stopped. My general obsession with drugs had a major component of learning and researching as much as possible, even while not actively using. DXM was one of the firsts that I got. It's what's in cough syrup, but I chose to get it in gel caps from where there are no ID laws and no purchase limits. Amazon. That and diphenhydramine, Benadryl, were what I alternated between. Benadryl, of course, made me tired, but also gave me a restless energy along with abstract thoughts. But DXM was my favorite. It made me feel like a better person. I was happier, I was funnier, and it removed my obsessive thinking. I was so relaxed I would go into the kitchen and dance as the sun rose. Drugs weren't used every day, but often enough, and only late at night so my parents wouldn't discover me while scattered. Around that time, some of my friends wanted to start making music together again, and they wanted me to join. Many band nights I would bring something weird for everyone to try. Poppers, nasal inhalers. At some point, I brought a small bottle of CBD because it had a fractional percentage of THC that was under the legal limit to sell. If I could take enough, it would be somewhat equivalent to an edible. Anything that would alter my reality in the smallest possible way, I would search it out to try, even going through a long list of nootropics that did nothing. Up until then, I had been searching for a job and hadn't been able to find anything due to it being the first year of COVID. I had been putting off applying to delivery jobs because it's more customer-facing, and my experience working at a movie theater let me know those roles aren't my favorite. But I applied to pizza places. Domino's got back to me first, and I started soon after. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. Spending most of my time in the car listening to music or rambling into audio recordings, and the interactions involved with the job were formulaic and short. Being a delivery driver, I have one purpose to the person I'm delivering to. I show up, drop off, and leave. Most orders were prepaid due to COVID, so I didn't have many cash transactions, which would lengthen the time spent interacting with someone. My drug experimentation eventually reached work. One time was with lithium. I wanted to see if lithium would stabilize my mood, so before work I went to a health food store and bought a bottle of lithium orotate. The effects kicked in only a few hours later. They were pronounced enough to make me feel like I was on something. It made my thoughts slow, dulled my emotions, leaving only slight anger, and made me feel like a danger to be driving. I was hyper-aware of how I couldn't remember anything and how my language abilities were shot while also running completely on autopilot. And in writing, there was so little cohesion, it was as if each new sentence could have started a different paragraph.
Memory issues are also not a good thing. I'm having a hard time writing this. In general, it makes me feel dumb, like I'm a danger to be on the road. The chemical lobotomy I've been looking for, and I'm not willing to give up feeling terrible for myself, because that in itself reminds me that this isn't it. It points me to God, whereas on lithium I forget everything and have a hard time listening to sermons. The pain is worth it if it's my cup to bear in order to remain grounded not on earth. I would give up being normal. I would give up relationships. I would give up social functioning as long as I have this. I only hope in my fumbling I can show someone the reason for my hope.
And when I had to speak to people at work, I had to formulate exactly what I was going to say before speaking. I planned to try lithium for a week and ended up stopping after 3 days. It did work, its intended effects did come, but elimination of my limited sense of self was not worth mood stabilization. I couldn't hear my own thoughts. It completely shut down the inner dialogue, requiring deliberate effort to think, and only when I verbalized was I able to stick to a line of thinking.
And I don't know if it's just because I haven't slept a lot in the past week, and then I slept a lot today, and that's why I kind of feel off. But I kind of felt normal before I took this lithium, and now I kind of feel very off. Like the best way that I could describe it would be like I feel like there's something. I feel like I'm on a really. Like I feel like I'm on something psychoactive, but it's just like not a good kind of psychoactive. Like it's just like a bad drug. Because right now I am very forgetful, and I kind of feel, I don't even know how I would describe it. I wouldn't say it's dissociation. Or maybe I would. I think that what's strange is that there is no uncertainty right now. So it's not like there's any reservations in my mind saying, no, you're here and you're in control of your actions. But now it just feels like I'm just a system. Like me as a person is not really here. And this is like different from how it normally is.
About a week before, something similar happened. I was on my way to work and felt off, racing thoughts and irritability. The night before, I had tried out that CBD oil and kept redosing throughout the next couple hours to try and feel anything. Given enough, I felt effects similar to weed, but it was extremely slight. Eventually, I went to bed and forgot it even happened until I felt that extreme irritability the next day. It was as if the emotional roller coaster I was used to had newfound peaks and valleys. I was obsessively ruminating on her and increasingly growing frustrated with myself.
Oh, this is March 6th, Saturday. I am driving Domino's right now. And I don't know what it was, but something clicked in my mind. Kind of clicked earlier today as well, where I'm fed up. I'm fed up with having to allocate mental real estate to thinking about a girl that is never going to happen. And I'm angry because it keeps getting egged on by me and her, and yet nothing happens, and we're both kind of just complicit in this. And I want it to end. I want it to be out of here. I'm done. I'm done with this. I don't want to think about it anymore. I don't want to think about this woman. It's like it's gonna be like like I'm thinking right now. It's gonna be 2 years. 2 years since this happened. And yet, I still think about it every day, all day. And it's so stupid. Like, for the most part, when I was at school and I was dating Sarah, I didn't have to think about this. I didn't have to think about it at all because I thought it was in the past. And I remember getting, she calls me, and I get sucked back into it all over again. And it's just like, it's such a pain. And it's not even her fault, because I do it. I do it too. Because let's just go over everything. She calls me, and then it's kind of dead for a while because I'm acting like an ass. So then later on, once I get home for winter, I call her and apologize for all the garbage I've done, and I leave it at that, and I'm like, okay, I'm done, I don't want it, but I still have that thing in the back of my mind where I'm like, maybe, and but it wasn't as much. It wasn't as much as it is now. Now we wait. I go on that road trip. Now, I deliberately went on that road trip so I could take a picture next to the Texas sign and put it on my story so that maybe I would get a message. And you know what? It worked. It worked. It might have taken a while after the fact, but it worked. And that's the worst thing about this, because I'm planning on doing it again just to... It's because it bounces back and forth. She initiates it, then I do, then she does, then I do. And right now it's on her cycle, but I'm getting, like, I don't want to wait for this. I want it to be over. I want this to be done. I don't want to think about it anymore. I am fed up. It is obsessive. It is so terrible. Like, for the nothing that has happened and all the pain and garbage that I have caused and brought about in our collective lives, it's just, I don't want to think about it anymore. I need some finality.
The road trip I was talking about didn't have a set destination, but I was dedicated to the concept of it for those alternative reasons. Plotting and daydreaming about the idea of romantic relationships would be interrupted by my history. The idealized version of who I could be or how I could make things work next time would be corroded by how I hurt people with my caustic being. Everything in the past pointed to dysfunction, and it was a constant reminder. A direct connection that made sense was not required. My brain operated to make connections out of the mundane and the worst moments. The worst words I had nearly forgotten about would be dragged to the forefront of my consciousness, ensuring I would always remember. Each time a specific detail resurfaced, it felt the same. The intensity never diminished, and it would emotionally fishtail the rest of my day until I finally slept. But I would stay up as long as I could to prevent exactly that. It felt right for me to feel this way. Having time to myself in the car as I worked did wonders for the obsession. One day, while I was continuing the practice of only using Snapchat to check on her, I saw she had posted. But, since I would never want her to know I looked, I would try to make out a picture from the tiny preview. I could decipher that she was in a car with a guy, and it instantly set me off. I screamed every song that came on as I delivered pizzas. The one time I made a delivery in her neighborhood, I had a panic attack. What specifically got to me was the sight of driving through the entry to the neighborhood. I had to sit in my car afterwards to calm down before returning to the store. Associations could be drawn from anything. If there wasn't a direct link, I would insert her into a situation. For example, I could be driving and someone in front of me does something stupid, so I say, "What the hell?" Which reminds me that my dad does the same thing when otherwise he doesn't swear, causing my mom to go, "Bob," to which he responds, "Look what he's doing!" And then I replay the situation as a self-insert of me and her. It was a near constant storm of mixed emotions. I would feel disgusted with my own desires. I would be happy in reminiscence. I would feel sad about her. I would laugh at the thought of her. I would get angry at my obsession with her. And all at the same time. Every emotion in the present moment seemed like it had always been that way. Like I had always been sad or always been happy, which made me doubt everything about myself. The whole process always felt physical. The nausea was the worst part. It was a continual ache interrupted by bursts of obsessive anguish, all with the remembrance of her or the past or even fantasized events occurring entirely in my head. Longing with an intensity that made it simultaneously feel like the worst and best emotional state I had ever experienced. The guilt and idealization is what drove the cycles. I would go from idealizing everything about her, even things I normally dislike, to the point where my head felt full, like I was experiencing a constant head rush, which would then swing into inadequacy, how I've failed, how I've disappointed, how I've hurt, and how I'm fundamentally defective. It would endlessly repeat until I wore myself out. Then it returned in waves until some event spurred it again. I wanted to break something. Many times I would grind my teeth, clench my jaw, scream, or hurt myself in some way. Not out of anger necessarily, but of self-awareness of my seemingly intrinsic and inescapable insanity. I would stand in my room, naked except for a ski mask, in complete darkness, and self-flagellate with the buckle end of a belt until the only thought that remained in my mind was how would the next hit feel if I struck harder in the spot that's most raw. In that process, it would turn to anger. Look at where you wound up. Look at what you obsess about. Look at how you refuse to move on. Look at how terminally unfixable you are. Look at what you are doing to yourself. And it left me feeling empty in the best way. Really, I was holding out until May when I planned to move to Chicago, not in the dorms. Being at home made me feel miserable. Instinctually, I would get annoyed at my parents over the smallest possible things. School effort was awful. I barely passed my classes. One was especially bad. I would get failing grades on every homework, every quiz, and every test. I didn't understand the material and didn't care to learn with online classes. Due to me not paying attention to the class schedule, I didn't realize this final was during the week before finals week. I was waiting during our school bulletin's scheduled time for this class's finals. 15 minutes go by and there's no test posted online. I go to my emails I had been avoiding and see that I missed it. Strangely, there's a sense of acceptance. I'll just have to retake it next semester when everything is back in person. And even stranger, when grades came back a week later, I passed the class with a C. The entirety of online school I learned nothing, and my grades of C and D reflected it. But I did eventually move out, almost immediately feeling better. I had planned to take the bottle of Wisdom Teeth Norcos with me before I left so I could go on a move-in bender, but when I went to look in their usual spot, they were gone. Then, I knew that they were locked up in the only other place they could be, a cabinet above my mom's desk that housed old medications. So, I gave up and settled on DXM.